Hi, my name's Owen Cooper, and I'm a sound designer focused on video game audio. This is the second of 2 videos where I'm going over, in the first video, how to create a radio station playback event using FMOD, and then in this video, how to use the blueprint system in Unreal to access that event and control some of the parameters that we created using the keyboard and mouse. And instead of talking about it anymore, I'll go ahead and demo what we're going to end up with. So I've just created a default third-person character example project, and we're going to be attaching this to the third-person character blueprint. So I press the minus key.
Are you tired of
We have our broadcast on. We can scroll up, and we'll go through different channels, and it will loop around. We can do the same thing in the opposite direction, using the mouse wheel to do this. And then if I press the plus key, we'll turn the receiver off, but the event keeps playing in the background. And then the last thing is we have volume down, so I can press it or hold it. And then when it gets to 0, it stops doing anything. So then when I press 9 and start going up, we do the same thing in the opposite direction. And it stops at 1. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and get into this. By the way, this is going to be kind of a long video because I'm going to build all of this from scratch and walk through it. But I'll go through it as quickly as I can and try to explain everything thoroughly still that's going on in this blueprint. All right. So we're going to open up third-person character. And I'm going to delete everything that I've already got here and start over. Okay. So first thing that we're going to need is the ability to start and stop this event. And we're going to assign that to number pad minus. Num minus. Okay. And what we want that to do is we want that to play our FMOD event, 2D. And I want to select our FMOD radio stations event that we created in the first video. And I want to take this return value and promote it to a variable just to make things more simple and organized later, because otherwise I'd have to drag a bunch of wires from this one node. This will allow me to instead reference it as a variable. Okay, so right now if I just hook this up and compile, if I test, then if I press the minus key, it will start playing, and then if I press it again, it will start playing another instance, which we don't want. We want instead, if I press the number key again, for it to stop playing the event. And if I press it again, it'll start over. So we need a branch. And we're going to need to create a new Boolean variable. So promote to variable. And we want to check if the radio is broadcasting already. So I'm going to call this radio underscore is broadcasting. Broadcasting. And we're going to want to set that by default to false. And if it's false, then we'll start playing the event. If it's true, then we want to stop the event. So I'm going to search stop FMOD, event instance stop, and we're going to refer to this same instance here. And then the last thing that we need to do is we need to set the variable of radio is broadcasting for each of these operations. So when it's playing, we want to set radio is broadcasting to true. And then when it's not playing, I'm going to duplicate this. When it's not playing, then we want to set radio is broadcasting to false. So that way, when it's playing, it will say radio broadcasting is true. So if we press number minus, it will stop it, and then it will set radio broadcasting is false. So then if we press it again, it will start playing the event. And I just need to hook that up a little bit differently. Oh, one more thing is we can print a string just so we can see on screen what we're doing, since we're only working with audio here. And I'll have it say broadcast off. Duplicate. For this one, it will be broadcast on. Okay, so compile and test. Press the minus key. We have our broadcast on. Press the minus key again and we turn it off. So that stops the event. Press it again, it starts the event over again. Cool. So the next thing that we want is we want the ability to turn our radio receiver on and off. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to take our event and we're going to either mute it or set it back up to a volume of 1. So we're going to assign that to the number pad plus key. And first we want to make sure that we have a radio broadcast. So connect that there. And then what we want to affect is our event instance volume. So I'm going to search FMOD volume, event instance set volume. And we're going to take our variable that we made earlier, get, and connect it to that node. So right now, if I connect this and compile, if I were to test it, what it's saying is, first check that the broadcast is on, and if it is, if I press the number key, number pad plus key, it will set the volume to a float value of 0, which is fine, but if we press it again, it's just going to set it at 0 again. So we need another branch here so that we can toggle it on and off. So I'm going to drag this out, make another branch, and we're going to make another Boolean variable, so promote to variable, and call this one radio underscore is on. Okay. So if it's on, then we will set the volume to 0. And then I'm going to duplicate this so that if it's off, then we will set the event instance to 1 instead. So the next thing we need to do is each time we set the event instance volume on these, we also need to change the true or false value of this radio is on Boolean variable. So I'm going to set the radio is on variable to false when the volume is at 0. And then I'm going to set it to true when the volume is at 1. Then we can print strings so that we can see what's going on. And we'll put radio off. Change the color so we can easily identify what type of operation we're doing here. And set this one to radio on. Cool. So now when we press number pad plus, it will first check to make sure that the radio broadcast is on. And if not, it won't run any further operation. If it is on, then we're going to go to this branch and check to see if the radio is currently on, which by default it is once the broadcast starts. So if it's on, then we're going to set the event instance to 0 and then set that variable to false. So radio is on will be false. So then the next time we press this number pad, it'll check about the broadcast. Then it will check to see if the radio is on. That will be set to false, so it'll run this operation instead and bring the volume back up to 1, and then set the radio is on Boolean variable to true. All right, so let's compile and test. Press the minus key, our broadcast is on, and then if I press the plus key, it turns the radio off and on, and the event will continue to loop in the background. Cool. So the next functionality that we want, and obviously the main functionality, is the ability to scroll between the different radio stations by going through our radio frequency parameter in FMOD. So I think the mouse wheel is quite an appropriate input for that. So I'm going to do mouse up and mouse wheel down. And we don't want these to do anything unless we have a broadcast and the radio is on. So when both of those conditions are met, then we will continue with the operation. So what do we want this operation to do? We want it to influence our FMOD parameter of radio frequency. So I'm going to search FMOD parameter, event instance set parameter, and then we'll get our instance variable here. And we need to run some math here, because right now this is saying when we mouse wheel up, it will set our parameter, which we need to type in here, radio frequency. It will set the parameter of radio frequency value to 0, which is not what we want. We want to be able to increment in a float decimal value upwards. So we're going to need to create a new float variable and call it radio frequency. And then we need to run a little bit of math here. So we want float plus float. And I'm going to make this add 0.1, not 0.01, but 0.1. So it's going to take our current radio frequency, add a value of 0.1, and then after that we want to set that to our new radio frequency. So I'm going to take that value, put it there, and then we want to run that into our FMOD parameter. Just clean this up a little bit. So now we're able to increment up using the mouse wheel, but what will happen is our radio frequency parameter is set from value 0 to value 3. And when we get to a value of 3, right now Unreal Engine isn't going to know to stop there. It will just keep going up. And so we'll just, in FMOD, we're just going to be sitting at 3. And Unreal will go just to infinity in the float value. And we don't want that. We want it to loop around again. So how do we do that? We have to make another branch. So we'll come in here. And we need to set up a condition that's saying only increase the radio frequency value if we are less than 3. So I'm going to drag off of here and put float less than. And the float that we want to compare is our current radio frequency. So I'm going to get radio frequency. And we want to make sure that that is less than 3. So if it's less than 3, it will add 0.1 to the value and then set that to the new parameter value. If it's not less than 3, then we want it to loop around. And we're going to do that by setting our radio frequency back to 0. So then it can loop all the way around again. Then we can print a string to check what we're doing. And we'll change the color to pink. And I'll print frequency up. Compile and test. So if I scroll the mouse wheel up, it goes up, and eventually it loops around again. Cool. So now we want to do a very similar operation, but in the opposite direction for when we mouse wheel down. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate all of this. And we can delete this and just refer to the same instance here. So what do we want to do when we mouse wheel down? Well, we want to first make sure that we have a broadcast and that the radio is on. And then this check, we want to make sure that it is greater than 0. So we have our radio frequency, and our condition is going to be float greater than float. So we want to make sure that our current radio frequency is greater than 0. And if it is, then we're going to set our current radio frequency to subtract by 0.1. So I'm going to delete that. Type float minus. You get float minus float. Set that to 0.1 again. And then we're going to output that to set to our new radio frequency. And then that's going to go to set our FMOD radio frequency parameter. And I can change this string to say down, frequency down. And the last thing is, if it's not greater than 0, so if it reaches 0 and we mouse wheel down again, we want it to go back up to 3.0. So set to 3.0. All right, so that should now work in both directions. So I'll go ahead and test that. Broadcast on, frequency up, go through the channels and it loops around, down, same thing in the opposite direction. Cool. Okay, so the next thing is we want to be able to change the volume of this event, and we want to be able to do it so that if we bottom out at 0, it won't run the operation anymore, and if we top out at 1, it won't run the operation anymore. And also we want the ability to be able to hold the button and have it continually step down or up in volume, because if we don't specifically tell Blueprint to do that, then it will just run the operation once when we press the button and won't do anything until we release it and press it again. So we've got a few things to think about here. I'm going to set these actions to number pad 8 for volume decreasing and number pad 9 for volume increasing. So again, we want to make sure that we have a radio broadcast and that the radio is on. Next, we want to think about what are we trying to influence here. We're trying to influence our FMOD parameter radio volume. Okay, so I'm going to search FMOD parameter again, event instance set parameter, and we're going to reference our variable here. And the parameter that we want to affect is radio volume that we set up in FMOD. So if I connect this here, then when I press 8, it's going to instantly set the volume to 0, which we don't want. So we need to run some similar math to up here. So what we want to do is make a new float variable, and I'm going to call this radio volume. And we want to run some math that will subtract a float. So we have float minus float. And just from playing with this earlier, I found that about 0.05 felt good. So we want to take our current radio volume, subtract 0.05 rather, and then we want to set that to our new radio volume. So we're going to output that to radio volume, and then take that value and set our FMOD parameter. So the other thing is we only want that to happen as long as our volume is greater than 0, because if we reach 0, we don't want pressing the 8 key to put that value below 0 and go into negative numbers. Instead, we want it to just stop there so that No matter how many times we press it, it just stops there, and if we press 9, the volume will start immediately going back up. So we're going to need another branch, and this one's going to be checking the value of our radio volume float variable. So this condition I'm going to drag out, and I will do float greater than float. And we're going to get our radio volume float variable. So we want to check to make sure that our current radio volume is greater than 0. And if it is, we'll continue on with the operation. If it's not, we'll just break the operation here. All right, so I'll go ahead and test that out. So let me print a string. We'll set this one to green. Green. More green. Okay. And I'll put volume down. All right, so test it out. Press the 8 key, and nothing happens. And that's because we need to set our radio volume default value to 1. Because if it's at default 0, then it's going to tell this operation not to do anything. So let's test that again. Press 8. And I continue with press 8. And once we get to 0, it stops. Cool, so that's looking good so far. Now we want to make it so that I can hold down 8 and it will step down in volume, and once I let go, it'll stop doing that. So how do we do that? We are going to need another branch that's going to tell us whether or not we're holding the 8 key or whether we've released it. So I'm going to put another branch in here. And we're going to make a new Boolean variable. And I'll call this one volume underscore is decreasing. And we want to set that back here when we press the number 8. So I'm going to bring this in and set volume is decreasing to true when we press the number 8 key. And then once we release it, it will set volume is decreasing to false. Cool. So next we want to put a slight delay in here, and the default of 0.2 seconds is just fine. Create a little space here. And then we're going to want to loop this all the way around to here. But just to make it a little more organized, I'm going to use a reroute node just so we can more easily see that this is looping back around. And then connect it right there. Okay, so that ought to work. So let me test that out.
Are you having trouble?
I press 8 once, it just takes one step down, and if I hold it, every 0.2 seconds it will go down, and if I release it, it'll sit at that level. And if I keep holding it or pressing it, it gets to 0 and it no longer performs the operation, which is exactly what we want. So now we need to set up that same functionality in the opposite direction for when we press the number 9 key. So I'm going to duplicate this whole thing, bring it down for 9. Just to organize this a little better, I'm going to reference this same event instance variable down here. So for this one, we want to change this Boolean variable from volume is decreasing to volume is increasing. So I'm going to go to this branch at the end and delete volume is decreasing. I'm going to promote this to a new Boolean variable. and call it volume underscore is increasing. If that's true, then we'll loop around. So we want to, when the number pad 9 key is pressed, set volume is increasing to true, and then continue on with the operation. And when we release it, then we want to set volume is increasing to false. Then we need to change our conditions here. So after we make sure that the radio broadcast and the radio receiver are on, then we want to make sure that our radio volume is less than 1. Because when we go up, we want it to stop at a value of 1 and then just sit there so that no matter how many times we press it or how long we hold it, it'll stay at 1, and then if we press 8, it'll start going in the opposite direction. So we need to make our condition float less than float. So we're going to start with our current radio volume. And we want to check to make sure that it is less than 1. If it is, then we'll continue on with this operation. And we want to take our current radio volume, and rather than decrementing by a float value of 0.05, we want to increment by that value. So I'm going to go here and float plus float. So we have our current radio volume, and we will add 0.05. Spit that value out to set our new radio volume, and then change our event instance parameter to that new value. So that ought to be everything, except I need to change this string to say volume up. Okay. So just to go over again real quick, when we press the number 9, it will set the variable volume is increasing to true. Then it will check that we have a radio broadcast and that the radio is on. And if both of those conditions are met, it will also check to make sure that our current radio volume is less than 1.0. And if that's true, then it will look at our current radio volume, add a value of 0.05, and set that to our new radio volume. It will take that float value and set our FMOD event instance parameter called radio volume to the new value. Then it's going to check if the volume increasing variable is true. So it's checking to see that the number 9 key is still pressed down. And if it is, then it's going to wait 0.2 seconds, print the volume up string, then loop back around and do the operation again. Once we release the number 9 key, it'll set the volume is increasing variable to false, which will break this operation here, and it will keep the volume where it currently is. All right, so I can compile, and we'll run through all of these functionalities now. So I press the minus key, it starts the event, broadcast on.
Figuring out what to do with your life.
We scroll up, and we can go through the channels, and then it'll loop around again. Same thing in the opposite direction.
Join Mega Brain, the only brain.
And then if I press 8, it takes a step down in volume. If I hold it, it'll incrementally make steps, and it'll bottom out at 0. And then if I press 9, same thing in the opposite direction, and it will top out at 1.0.
Are you tired of feeling a breeze late at night?
Then I can press the plus key, and it will stop the radio receiver, but the event will continue to play in the background. If I press it again, I can toggle it on and off. Alright, so that covers all of the basic functionalities that you would expect for a radio station playback system, I think. I hope you found this useful and helpful, not too confusing, and not too boring. And if you have any critiques or comments or questions, please feel free to let me know in the comment section. And if you'd like to check out some of my other stuff, you can go to my website at owencoopersound.com, or you can look at some of my other YouTube videos here. And I'm building this for a game called Infrared that is not yet released. The developer is Dark Dojo Studios. And I'll put some credits for the artists whose songs I've used in this example, and also my friend Eric Lewis, who's contributing to original music for the soundtrack for the game and also threw together these placeholder radio ads. And yeah, have fun making audio and making games. Take care.